Maddie, you're introducing us, aren't you?
Hello, and welcome to the 5 elements of a successful multinational HR tech strategy. My name is Maddie Christopher, Deputy Editor of HR Zone, and I'll be your presenter for this webinar, brought to you by HR Zone and Sage. In this session, we'll be sharing crucial insights from Sage on building a successful global HR strategy. Speakers joining us today are Willorna Brock, Global HR Consultant of Goshen HR, Debbie Potter, VP of People, Corporate Functions and Projects at Sage, and Kostub Sevak, Consultant at Sage. Welcome and thank you for joining us. The group chat function is available to say hello, so please share thoughts, ask questions, and get involved. Please send any questions you have as we go along by posting them in the group chat, as we'll have around 15 minutes at the end for the audience Q&A. There is also a Q&A function to post questions anonymously. We'll have a couple of polls for you to do, so keep an eye out for those. And in the handout section, you can view Sage's ebook and global HR strategy, as well as more information on Sage. Finally, you'll get a copy of the recording sent to you so you can watch on demand. That's all from me. Over to you, Debbie, Cos, and Willorna.
Good morning. Delighted to be here today. We'll start by looking at today's agenda. We'll be covering a bit of context. As we all know, it's certainly been an extremely busy time for the HR organisation over the last few years. Then we'll talk about how do you build a global HR strategy? What do you need to do? What are the components of a global approach? And finally, we'll wrap up on next steps, building a strategy that really lasts. As you know, the pandemic has brought many challenges, particularly on how we manage our workforce, how we connect, and how we do things differently across the globe. So why do we need to build an HR strategy? Why should HR and people leaders manage a global HR workforce? But most importantly, what do we need to be thinking about? Willorna, would you like to start this off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here this morning. If you're watching on demand, lovely to speak to you. As organizations grow globally and expand their workforce, it's very, very important to have a global HR strategy because one size doesn't fit all. I have this mantra in HR, which is think global and act local. There are several things that we need to consider when we are building growth internationally. So it's usually good practice for the business to even engage HR at the start when they're thinking of expanding so that they can decide whether the location that they have gone into is the right place. But never mind, even when that doesn't happen, HR can still come in and support the business in terms of building that strategy. Considerations like local legislation, local culture, compensation strategies, regulations around pensions, regulations around sort of maternity leave, paternity leave, all the sort of things that the considerations that we have in the UK, we have to think about those from a global perspective and how we can sync them with our own sort of company strategy. So it's a really important thing for a global organization to think about how they're going to structure their HR function, how they're going to hire people, think about the entire employee life cycle from recruitment to onboarding to payroll to benefits to learning and development, all of the usual sort of HR life cycle processes that we have, how are we going to incorporate that globally? So it's really important to have that in place.
Thanks, Willorna. Let's go to a poll. And what we want to ask you is, do you have a global HR strategy? So while we're waiting for people to participate, for me, a global approach can ensure that you have the right structure and organisation design in place, and it also aligns your HR and people strategy with the business strategy. There's no point in the business going one way and you go in the other. So it's really important that we do align as one organisation. Okay. I can't see the results. Have they come in yet?
Yes, I think, yeah, Debbie, we've got some results over here. I believe, so what I'm seeing on my screen, the poll's completed now. So we've got about 50% of the participants who've said no, that they do not have a global strategy as of now, with 20% saying it is in progress. And finally, there's 30% who have said they do have a strategy. So I guess the bulk of the population is where it's in progress or they currently do not have one.
Well, Lorna, would you like to comment on any of that?
That's not really surprising. Most places I've worked in usually don't have one from the get-go. It's a case of we can only have a global HR strategy if we know what the business wants to achieve. So if the business has not really consulted with us, they just sort of decided to go and be in this location and they've started there. Perhaps it's because they have a client there, it's because they might have population there. They normally don't think about the HR strategy. It usually comes afterwards. So it's really important at that stage to start thinking about how you're going to build that strategy. So I'm hoping that this webinar will help people that haven't actually started on that journey yet, and people who are already started, any sort of tips and things that they can pick up from this.
Great. Thank you, Winona. So we've talked about why global approach. Let's now look at the how. We're going to cover 5 components of a global HR strategy in today's webinar. Cos, would you like to talk about the first one?
Absolutely. Debbie, thanks. This one in particular, better digital employee experiences, I think that is very important in this day and age, right? It's important to give our employees the consumer grade experiences that they are already used to in their day-to-day lives. So everything from they do with online banking, online shopping, app-based shopping, app-based bill payments. So employees, as all of us obviously, are so used to consuming this content, carrying out these tasks on the go. So it's very important that we are able to replicate a similar experience in their organizational world as well, where they are engaging with systems across the business. In essence, basically what we are doing is we are meeting our employees where they are, right? Being device agnostic, being on their iPads, being on their mobile devices, right? And at Sage People, that is one of the things that we've looked at. And in fact, we've found out that a lot of the customers that we work with, they also use Teams a lot. So we've recently launched our Teams app as well. And that allows employees to carry out some of their day-to-day tasks from Teams where they spend most of their day. Right. So this digital experience is first and foremost where we deliver it, how we meet our employees in this space where they are familiar and comfortable in. But then there's this other aspect as well, right? So it is not just about how and where we deliver it, but it's also about what we deliver to our employees, right? And to deliver a truly engaging digital experience, you have to make sure that not just the content and functionality that you surface is not just from a business perspective, but it also has to be relevant from an employee perspective, that they can engage with that content, right? Could be perhaps based on their job roles, or in this day and age, it could also more importantly be something that reflects the cultural requirements, the inclusivity requirements that our employees have. So I guess that's where I look at it from a digital experiences. Wilona, what's your thoughts on the experience side?
Sure, that ties in with giving a great employee experience. So if from the sort of start of their journey, from recruitment to onboarding to whilst they're there, being able to carry out all those sort of HR processes that people do, like booking time off, recording annual leave, perhaps accessing training and things like that. And also for HR as well, it's a good thing because you can get inside the way the HR function would interact with the digital experience that Sage would provide. that all makes like, I mean, I guess we'll come to that later, but it's all about technology and making life easy for people. Just as you said, because that people are used to shopping and doing things online. When they're at work, they want things to be easy as well. Where am I going to find this form? Moving away from paper forms, moving away from a lot of admin. Where am I going to, how do I book my leave? How do I see how much time I've got left for the rest of the year? How my pay slips, things like that. So it's all of those things that people want to access whilst they're at work, giving them that employee experience that is digital, that is fast, that is responsive, would add value.
And these are really, really great points. I think wherever you have a presence in the world, it's really important that your employees feel connected to the business, but they also get the same experience. So whether they're in Australia, they're in France, Germany, they feel that, you know, when they're onboarded to when they're actually really in the organization, they have that connection, but the experience has been exactly the same. And it's really down to your leaders as well to make sure they create an environment where employees feel respected. And we've talked about culture, but it's about their feeling valued and able to contribute their best work. When we think about digital experience, it's really about the communication platforms you have in your organization. It's about the learning and development, your performance management. How do people know how they're doing, how they're performing in your business? And that really supports the way you work and ensures an inclusive culture within your business. I mean, when I go back and look at COVID, our systems really ensured that we stayed connected and we were checking on their well-being. We made sure they understood their goals. And I think, you know, how we hired people into our organization, without those systems, it would have been extremely difficult to do that. So when I look now at what we've got with Sage People and other systems, we could not have done that without that. So I think that's really important. You think about how your values, your culture really align with your policies and your procedures and your systems within your business. Cos, flexibility for local variation. Would you like to give us some your views on that?
Absolutely. So again, building on what we just discussed, right, about the better digital experience, I think this one is again very important from an employee perspective, right? Because as we go into these different markets, employees' cultural as well as functional requirements change, and we have to be able to again support those requirements, right? It's no good saying a UK-based solution and I'm going to push it out to all of my employees across the globe. It just doesn't work, right? So you have to have a solution that's going to support the local variation. So it could be everything from language requirements, right? As an employee, I might want to work with the system in a language other than English. Is your solution able to support that? It could be things like from an HR perspective, when you are managing, for example, compensation requirements for your employees, are they in local currencies, right? So again, if you are able to manage all of this in one solution, that then allows you, and we'll discuss this later on, but when you're looking at certain metrics across the business, you're comparing apples to apples, right? Rather than having these disparate systems or maybe everything that's very standard globally, but does not at all reflect the local requirements. So yeah, this is definitely key to kind of building on from those digital experiences, but taking it that level further and more localized experiences.
Thank you, Cos. I think you touched on, having the policies that adapt to local norms and your culture. What you might have in the UK or the US may not be right for other companies or other geos within your organization. To really think about the local cultures apart from your business culture. And it is about utilizing technology to change working practices, but also working differently. And as we know, we are all working differently from what we were doing a couple of years ago. If we now go to manage local and global compliance, well, Lorna, would you like to tell us your views on that?
Right, that's really a key one, because that's about managing risk for the organization, ensuring that they have that sort of level of compliance that is risk-free, minimizing risk to the organization. Things like tax, things like employment legislation, it's definitely different in all the geographies I've worked in. That sort of, for example, if you have your main global handbook or guide, you cannot just cut and paste and try and create addendums or appendices for your local geographies, for the other countries that you're working in. Every country needs its own handbook or its own guide or its own contract. You can vary it, but it would have to be compliant with the local laws and the local culture. A good way to do that is to have a terms and conditions matrix for each location that you're based in. So what that is like a basic spreadsheet on Excel where you have the countries, a list of countries, and you have all the sort of elements that would go into a contract or handbook. Things like annual leave requirements, things like maternity and paternity, things like pension requirements, things like termination notice. How much notice do I have to give in this geography? In fact, in terms of annual leave, I discovered in one of the geographies that my company is based in that annual leave is based on age. So I've never seen that in the UK, where depending on how old you are, you get more or less days allowance for annual leave. And even the terminology, even the semantics, in the US, it's paid time off, PTO. In the UK, we call it annual leave. And within that PTO in the US, there are various things. It could even cover sick leave. So it's really, really important that all of these things are looked at, because it does upset employees when they see that the company is not addressing their local needs. They will complain. They'll say you're too UK centric or you're too US centric. You don't care about us. So that doesn't really help engagement with your local staff.
Thank you, Ilona. And you touched on annual leave, and I think I've manage a global workforce. I think what's really important for me is to have that data centralized in one area. What I don't want to do is to go for 6 different systems to try and find where people are, or if they're off sick, or for example, if I need to understand their performance rating. I really want to have one centralized system. And I think now, Cos, you're going to tell us a bit more about comprehensive analytics.
Yeah, absolutely, Debbie. Thanks. And I think we should also have a poll coming out for the participants. I think it's just come through enough. So this is obviously quite crucial, right? As a business, as you move, grow, or as your business evolves and you grow across these multiple countries, analytics is by far one of the most important requirements that I come across when I'm talking to customers, right? Having the ability to see what's happening across all of these different regions with all of your different employees, having the ability to report on this data in real time is absolutely crucial, right? We know in this day and age, things move very quickly, right? From COVID lockdowns, we had legislative changes, we have cultural changes, right? The society expects different elements from us, employees' expectations change, and being able to analyze the data so that you can make those informed decisions is absolutely crucial. And this could be for a range of things, right? So it could be just simply looking at the system as a single source of truth. And when you talk about, Debbie, you mentioned performance related metrics, right? Being able to report on those performance related metrics from across the globe, see how your business is performing, in which areas are we exceeding performance, in which countries are we below expectations, right? So we can then start enacting measures which allow us to kind of plug these gaps before it gets to the end of year stage. That's quite crucial. Looking at skills and competencies across different regions, right? So that when you are launching new projects, you know where you have the talent pool to help you successfully deliver those outcomes. So analytics, absolutely by far the most important requirements. And I think in the poll, let me see if the results have come through enough. Yeah, so we've got some I think the poll's completed. I'm just looking at the figures now. So you've got, I guess, a bulk of the participants are saying they can report on some of these real-time metrics like headcount, attrition reporting in less than a week. There are examples of almost 10%. It takes more than 4 weeks to put together a headcount or attrition report, right? And that is crucial. I come across this in most of my engagements with customers who have a presence in multiple countries, because if they are using disparate systems, by the time they collate data from all of those different systems and present it to their senior stakeholders, that data is already out of date. right? So especially when it comes to headcount reports, attrition reports, being able to, at a click of a button, see the metrics for across your business, to be able to drill into data for specific countries, for specific teams, is quite powerful. And that is what a cloud-based system can do for you if you have a single solution across your different geographies.
Yeah, I'll just come back to that, actually, how important it is. You mentioned headcount. So in terms of even pension and benefits reporting, so sometimes when you're in a different location, you might use a local reward vendor that would administer all your benefits, your pensions and things like that. So at the end of the year, when you need to sort of calibrate everything and make sure that you've got the right headcount, that is really crucial, because you'll end up paying more or less than you shouldn't, that you need to pay for. And in terms of reporting for the government sort of regulations that you'll have to comply with, you need the headcount figures, you need them to be accurate.
If I can just also add that, I do use Sage People daily, and it's really great for me to get that real-time data. So if a leader comes to me and says, hey, I need my headcount report, I've got huge attrition, what's happening here? I can do those reports and really validate those concerns. Have they really got attrition, or does it feel like that more people are leaving? I think the other thing for me is around gender mix. I can see, do I have a really great amount of diverse thinking globally, or do I have perhaps too much in one area and too less in another? Have I got the right competences in my team and the organization? Looking forward, it's really important that you think about strategically, this is where my business needs to go, but have I got the right skill set and the right people to get there? And for me, it really does help leaders solve critical business issues. And that's key. What systems you've got to think about what data can these systems produce for me. I think, Cos, I'm going to pick on you again. And if you can talk about automation and consistency, that'd be great.
Absolutely. And this is, again, linked to, as a business, as your processes evolve, as you move into different countries, right? Having the ability to automate some of your tasks is crucial. So now we are looking at it from an HR perspective, right? What I want is for my HR team to be a little less tactical and a bit more strategic when it comes to working with the business, as with the senior leadership team, kind of taking a stake in those decision-making processes. So what we mean by automation is within the HR world, there are a lot of tasks that are currently run manually, things that are notifications that HR team members are having to manually inform managers of. It could be simple things like, if you look at it from a cultural perspective, work anniversaries, being able to celebrate employees' work anniversaries, those long-term service awards, all of those kind of tasks in a lot of cases are manual right now. And HR spends a lot of time reporting on that data and then communicating out to the business. These kind of simple tasks can be automated, and that frees up a lot of the admin time for the HR teams so that they can then focus on some of the more strategic themes within the business, especially empowered with those real-time reporting and analytics that they have access to. So that's around the automation. And then the consistency. So as a business, as you grow, your approval processes, do they scale with you? For example, now you have 20 teams who report under the same chief operating officer, but across the different geographies, right? Being able to reflect those approval processes, again, taking away the burden from the HR team of having to keep tabs on the relevant stakeholders and let the system do that for you. That allows you to scale quickly as well, right? So for example, if you go through a merger or an acquisition, you have the ability to bring in additional businesses, but then have standardized processes where required, which immediately take effect. And then you can have your HR team start engaging more on a personal basis with those senior stakeholders rather than having to worry about it from a process perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, Cos. Some really, really good points there. Building a global HR strategy involves creating a connected and productive remote workforce. And I think we've all seen now where flexible working has come in. We've seen about people working remotely. So how do you really get that connection? How do you ensure that colleagues have the same experience as everyone globally? And it is about having an impactful, appropriate communication strategy. It's about listening to employees thinking about their well-being, how they perform in the workplace. And all of those you can pull together as long as you've got a great system that can all be centralized in one area. So how do we build a strategy that lasts? Well, we've touched on, I know Cos mentioned this, a single cloud global HR and people strategy is mission critical. So Cos, let's talk about the ROI in a multinational global HR system.
Yeah, absolutely, Debbie. I think this is quite crucial. And I think something you mentioned at the start of the conversation, right? We know HR teams are really busy these days, right? We are getting bombarded left, right, and center with things changing, employee expectations changing. So it almost seems like we are always on the back foot firefighting. We work with a lot of our customers and obviously with a lot of the senior HR stakeholders across various customer businesses. And we know that dedicating time to carry out this kind of return on investment business case is quite difficult for most of our customers. So what we did is, as Sage people, we partnered with Forrester Consultants. So they are an independent research firm. And basically what Forrester did is they went and spoke to existing Sage people customers, right? Mid-market global organizations to understand how they were using Sage people, gathering a lot of data points around not just the costs, but also the benefits that our customers were seeing. And on the back of that, Forrester put together this composite organization, an 800 employee business across 10 countries. And their case study basically dwelled into the various metrics of how the various costs that are part of the project, but at the same time, what are the different benefits that our customers have been able to articulate. And some of the metrics that you see on the slide over here, right, quite staggering, really. So for a 810 country business, a solution like Sage People can bring up to total benefits of up to 1.3 million, or actually more than 1.3 million over a period of 3 years. That's quite staggering when you sit back and think about it. The second metric that really caught my eye was, as a business, when you make an investment, obviously you need to justify the return on investment to the stakeholders within the business, right? And for our customers, we've been able to show, or we've been able to give them that payback within 6 months of them launching Sage People, which is again brilliant, right? So you've made that investment, but you are immediately starting to see runs. And this is again very powerful because a solution like Sage People can be implemented in less than 90 days. So you can start garnering value within 90 days of the project being kicked off, and which is brilliant for our customers. So we've put together this total economic impact study, which is available on our website, and I believe this is one of the handouts that our participants can get today as well on the call. So this is supposed to enable HR stakeholders to sit back and think about how this what are the benefits of a Sage People, a solution like Sage People that they can articulate for their senior stakeholders to help them with that business case.
Thank you, Cos. And really, again, some really great points there. You can see from our customers, and I apologize, it is quite small, but you can see from our customers, from those that have used Sage People product, they've had impressive results. And we are really proud to provide a solution that meets the needs of companies with a global workforce. I'd like to thank Lorna and Cos for their input today, and I'm now going to hand back to Maddie to open up the floor for the Q&A session.
Hello, thank you. Yes, it's now time for Q&A. So I'm going to start asking some questions. Firstly, we've had a question from Harry Redmond saying, regarding analytics, what are the most important things to be reporting on? I'm going to fire that at Cos, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Harry, for the question. So analytics, there are obviously all of those standard reports that you'd expect from an HR perspective, right? Some of the things we mentioned earlier, like headcount reporting, like attrition reporting, absence reporting, performance reporting. So there are all of these standard reports that you'd expect from a system. But obviously, again, like we were talking about, the field of HR, or rather the field that we operate in, is constantly changing, right? So the reporting requirements, the analytics requirements also change for businesses. Lately, we've been seeing a focus on DEI-related reporting, so diversity, equity, and inclusion-related reporting out of the system. So that is also where our customers have been able to leverage a system like Sage People, because you have the ability to roll out new fields, roll out new forms. So DEI-related information that you might never have captured, you have the ability to do that. And based on the data that's pulled into the system, you can then run your real-time reporting on where, as a business, do you need to focus your action items. And I think, Debbie, you might be able to share something about how Sage itself has used some of
Yeah, I think what you need to think about when you say the data is it's what commercially do you need for your leaders. So what would be the impact? What could this data give to your organization? So for example, headcount. You have a budget. Are you aligned to your budget? Have you hired too many people? What's the cost impact on your organization? Can you afford to hire all these people? If suddenly you have a whole lot of attrition, how does that expose your business? And you will not know these things unless you generate all these reports. I mean, the key things for me, and you've mentioned DEI, are attrition, because there is a cost, and hiring. There's also a cost to bringing people in. And also, if your business slows down, as we all know, people are the most expensive part of your business. So you need to be able to stop very quickly or start very quickly. And what helps me, what supports me in doing that, is having that real-time data in the system at my fingertips, where I can just go out, get the reports, discuss it with my leaders. And we're not just talking UK, as I mentioned, it's a global system. So I know if somebody wants to ask me how many people have I got in Australia, what's the attrition rate, what's the gender mix, like that, I can just get it for them. So it's a really good intuitive system, and that's how I use that data.
Great, thank you, both of you. The next question might be a little tricky. What do you think is the most important element if you had to pick one? Well, Lorna, I'm going to be cruel and ask whether you have an answer for this.
Are you talking? Oh, coming off mute. Yeah, I'm coming off mute. Sorry. Are you talking about the elements that we talked about, the different elements of Sage, the compliance, the digital experience, all of those elements? If it's that, then it's really difficult to pinpoint one particular thing. But maybe as a starting point, because you don't want to get into trouble, you want to manage risk for the organization, because that could be costly. I would think the managing local compliance would be the first step. If I had to put that as a priority, I mean, that is definitely a priority, making sure that you're legally compliant, making sure that you've got all the tools and things you need to set up in that jurisdiction. That is really important, and the system will help you to do that. I can also talk about the digital experience as well, because people are people want to enjoy work. So giving people that, digital experience that's going to be seamless and enjoyable for them is also something to consider.
Thanks, Lorna. Cos, do you want to answer that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. But I completely agree with Lorna on that, right? The compliance aspect definitely comes first, because that puts you reputationally at risk, as well as the legal fines. Can you operate or not if you are not in compliance? So yes, all of those steps are important, but purely from as an ongoing concern, you want to make sure you are legally compliant in the jurisdiction that you operate in. So that would be my first, and then the rest as well, like experiences.
Thank you. And Debbie?
I think it depends where you are on your journey within your organization. So it's kind of, and all the points that Lorna and Cos have said are all really very good. But for me, it's about the digital connection. And I think, as I've mentioned earlier, we've got different ways of working now, where everyone was in the office, they were next to each other, they can chat, they can communicate. Now they're spread all over the world, and you could have one person who's remote, you could have a group of people in the same country but different offices. So to me, it is about that connection, the digital experience, because that also supports your values, your behaviours, and everyone does feel, they've got that one point where they can communicate with each other. Everyone knows this is a system for where I put my goals, the performance management. This is a system for leaders where we go for headcount. So I think for me, it's about that digital connection, because it is about, we all know hiring is extremely difficult. We all know people have choices where they want to go and work. So for me, the digital experience really, from hiring right the way through, gives that consistent feel, but also the experience is exactly the same. And that's what you want with your workforce. They want to feel that they've been treated fairly and consistently throughout their journey within your organisation.
Thank you. 3 very good answers for a tricky question, I would say. Debbie, I'm going to come back to you again for the next question. We have, how much more difficult is it to onboard new people if they are all from different countries or even continents?
I think with the digital experience now, it's a lot more easier. And the reason I say that, if I go from where I've worked in previous organisation before the kind of digital age came in, it was quite difficult because you all kind of had a presentation, but you weren't really connected to other colleagues in your organisation. So I would say it's a lot better. It's more consistent. And I mean, if I can just explain what we do in Sage, is there is your local orientation program you can go through, which, as you know, Lorna's touched on the governance, the kind of T's and C's, but then there's a global view. And I think what I like about Sage is that where we connect people, it's not just in country, they understand different cultures, they understand our global policies and procedures, which is also important. It's not just about the local piece, it's really understanding the business you're working for. So for me, I would say it's easier. People feel more connected. You've got information at your fingertips. There is just so much out there now to make people feel they belong to an organisation. And that's really important. If you're in a country, as I mentioned earlier, on your own, you really want to understand the values, the culture, the behaviours that's expected of you in an organisation. And I think the digital experience definitely helps you do that now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Debbie. And we have a question that I feel has Walorna's name written all over it. What do you do if you have a talented employee working alone from another country who feels isolated and disconnected from the rest of the team?
That's a good question, and that's a question that's come up quite a bit in the last few years with COVID and people having to work remotely. I guess that could even happen with somebody working in the UK. So it's all about connectivity, it's all about engagement, and communication is a big part of it. So as a line manager or as a team person, what's happened to this colleague that's working somewhere else that I don't get to see? So how can I connect with them? How can I make sure that I build that relationship with them? How can I check in on them, their well-being, their are they doing well, their performance? So it's about technology enabling us to do that, enabling that connectivity and regular communication with that person, and making sure that person feels able to communicate with you as well, because people don't always feel able to open up. What's psychological safety like in your organization? That sense of belonging that Debbie just mentioned. So making sure that people know when they can ask for help, making sure that people know that they're not afraid to share that they're not feeling okay, they're not feeling good, or they're struggling. So it's all of that. So even we can have the technology, we can have all of those things in place, but as a human, what's the human touch? What's the organization like in terms of psychological safety? That person that's working remote might be scared to talk, might be scared to open up because they might feel that by them sharing that they're struggling or they can't do the work, we think they're not being productive. They'll be afraid to speak up. So as managers, as leaders, even as a colleague, make sure that you create that environment where people are able to speak up.
Does anyone have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say that it's really important that managers are trained and are given the right tools to be able to do this, because it is very difficult for a manager to think about I've got a culturally diverse team globally. They're remote. How do I manage that if I've never done this before? So it's about your leadership capability as well. So really, ensure that when you do start to expand your presence globally, that you not just think about what systems I need to connect everyone, but am I giving the right skills, experience and knowledge to my leaders, enable for them to do that? Because, it is really important about people's well-being, and they do feel cut off sometimes if they're there on their own. But as long as leaders know what they need to do and they've got the tools and they've been through the training, I think that will go a long way to supporting your business to expand and for, as we've said before, for colleagues to feel really connected to the business.
Can I just add something to that, actually, in terms of enabling managers to be able to do this? There's also intercultural training, because how someone behaves, what is acceptable in a particular culture, what you can say to somebody, or the way you can speak to your manager in a particular culture, obviously, as we know, is really different. So in a global environment, intercultural training is right there at the top of the list. It's something I always recommend. How do you manage in China? How do you manage in India? Performance management conversations, they're not the same as you would have them in the US, as you'd have them in India, for example. So intercultural training is something that people should also think about.
Well, Lorna, just that's a very interesting topic. I wonder whether you have any more suggestions on how a company could go about learning more about intercultural training and the differences between cultures.
There's lots of resources online. There's lots of vendors and companies that specialize in doing this. I first got to know this whilst I was studying and did a module on international HR. There is academic research that supports the view that we're all different in terms of as much as we're human, but there's a cultural aspect to behaviors. So if people search online, there are lots of vendors that prepare people for going on international assignments. So for example, if you have a staff or colleague who's going to work in, say, China for 6 months, it's always good practice to have that pre-assignment training where they get to know about the culture, they get some language training, for example. The manager would get that into the cultural training. So it's actually available online. I don't want to sort of recommend any particular vendor, but there are quite a few that I have worked with that are really good. So it's just a case of searching for intercultural training, HR. The name that comes to mind, the person is an academic researcher. The name is Hofstede. I can put it in the chat. So I did study his research on culture, the impact of culture on international operations. So I'm going to put that in the chat. That's not a vendor. That's actually an academic. And there is an institute that is actually connected to that piece of research. So people can check that out.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ilona. And Cos, I was just wondering, continuing on this topic, how could you use technology to perhaps locate employees who might be falling through the cracks?
This is one of the use cases that we come across all the time, right? So you have all of these employees in these different locations and having, for what Vilona has very rightly called out, the different cultural requirements. So one of the tools that we find ourselves or we find our customers using is the ability, for example, to have pulse surveys being pushed out, right? So some of our customers use this on a weekly basis, right? Especially when we went through the lockdown and when things changed very quickly and changed a lot very quickly. Tools such as being able to push out these targeted pulse surveys. So it could be for an individual, it could be for a group of individuals. But that then allows you to use your solution not just as a platform where employees come in to complete the tasks or read what the company has communicated with them or what the organization has communicated to them, but it's also now a tool for soliciting feedback from our employees, right? To find out what is working, what is not working, where is their scope for improvement. So that is something that absolutely from a technology perspective, being able to push out those pulse surveys and report on that data in real time, like with everything else, is quite crucial. That's how tech can help. But also, we've covered this in that targeted digital experiences for employees, right? So it is about if that person is in this specific position in the specific country at this specific juncture in their life or in their employment journey with the business. Can we now push out targeted content for this employee? Can we push out targeted functionality for this employee, right? And that's what the technology solution allows you to do, right? You can tailor it to reflect those specific requirements so that the employee has access to just the policies that they should have access to, right? And there's additional policies now which are very country specific. It could be about the learning courses that Vilona has mentioned, right? So if you're going to push them, if we know somebody is going on a secondment to a country for 6 months where we have a very small population, can I then automatically trigger those learning courses that this employee should undertake before their secondment starts, right? And that allows us to prepare these employees and give them the tools that they need so that they have a positive experience, and more importantly, they still have that that feeling of belonging with the business, and they know that the business is looking out for them at all points.
I'd like to just touch back on the culture aspects as well. So HR usually gets involved with not just the employee, but their family as well, if they're going on a secondment for so for example, they're going on a long-term assignment, 2 or 3 years. Some companies would obviously, if they're married and they've got children, the companies would also get involved in sponsoring, arranging that person's their spouse visa, their children's visas, schools, etc. So that then we come to the cultural training as well. So even the partners and the children of that employee would actually get that training as well, because sometimes that assignment will fail not just because of the employee, but because of their family. So if their family struggles to assimilate into the culture of the country that they've gone into, the assignment will fail, because they'll decide, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not staying in this location anymore. My wife is not happy, or my partner's not happy. My children are not settled in school. I'm going back. So HR then gets involved. So you actually, with international employees, you actually get more involved in their lives than you would when they're based in the home country. So that's just a consideration for people who are actually being sent to go and work abroad for a long period.
Thanks, Debbie. Is there anything you wanted to add to that? Wonderful. Okay. So what do you do if the technology you are using doesn't work or is restricted in new employee locations? Would you like to answer that?
Sure. I mean, this is a difficult one for me. So Sage People as a solution, we know we have currently employees, as in we support our customers' employees in over 150 countries right now, right? So there are solutions out there which have a global footprint, which allow you to go into these different geographic locations and reflect the requirements of those specific locations in terms of legislative requirements, cultural requirements, functional requirements. So what would you do if your solution didn't permit it? I think there are a couple of ways you could handle that. Is you still want, from your senior stakeholder perspective, you still want your analytics out of your global solution, right? So yes, there might be elements that you are still capturing where employees cannot perhaps engage directly with the system, but the aim should always be to pull that data in through tools like bulk uploads into a solution with automatic scheduled imports into the system, whereby that data is still available for you. So at least when it comes to decision making, making those informed decisions, you still can rely on your solution to give you all of the analytics and reporting, even for those jurisdictions where employees are not directly engaging with the system. There are a couple of use cases that come to mind. There are countries where the government requirements are, the legislative requirements are that the employee data should be hosted locally as well. So we've got customers who would use Sage People as a solution. Obviously, our data centers are normally in Europe or in UK, depending on where the company itself is headquartered. But at the same time, what they would do is use Sage people for every day-to-day task management. Employees engage with Sage people on a day-to-day basis, but then they would also use Sage people to push data out automatically to a third-party local vendor, just to in terms of meeting the legislative requirements where the employee data needs to be hosted locally as well. So we can do something around that as well.
Thanks, Kaz. I feel like that was quite a tricky question, so well done for fielding that. And another question that has come in is, where is a good place to check up on relevant localized legislation? I'm going to go to Walorna and then to Debbie.
I'm just coming off mute. Yeah. Without sort of selling any particular vendor, but I sort of platforms, sort of legal platforms like the CIPD, HR Inform, Expert HR. If it's the US, there's the Society for Human Research Management. They've got a website as well, but there are quite, I'll have to put it in the chat, because there is a platform that I use which covers lots of different geographies. And Evershed Sutherland, one of the law firms that I've used in the past, recently launched an app which has, it's a sort of legal, the law firm, and there's an app where you can actually look at different things in, different HR compliance in different countries, and that's an app as well. So I can just share the links, because I mean, they are really useful sources of information. So as a starting point, it's always good to just go online and look at these platforms. But if you want specialist advice tailored to that geography and your organization, it's always best to seek the advice of a specialist employment lawyer.
Yeah, I concur with everything. I think for me, I do go onto the CIPD because it has got a huge amount of content on there. It obviously depends on your budget as well, because it depends, again, if you're a large organization or if you're a small organization, it really is important that you do understand what's happening in each of these countries, what the laws, what you can, what you cannot do. If you can, I mean, I like to use global law firms because they usually do have a presence in every country. And if they don't, then they've somebody else they can actually recommend who they've worked with very closely. But we all know that can be very expensive. So I would say, try other areas first, but it is important you get it right first time, because it can give you a lot of pain if you set things up. And, it could be very costly as well. So do it right the first time, and then that will set you up for success going forward.
Kaz, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No. Yeah, no, absolutely agree with everything that Walorna and Debbie have said on that. There are resources out there, but it's like Debbie just called out. If you get that professional support first time around, that means you're basically set the process for scaling, basically. So.
Wonderful. And I just wanted to, before we close off, I just wanted to think about perhaps our smaller organisations that are with us today. And for them, going global is a completely new thing. Are there any extra tips that we haven't covered, or things to bear in mind that we could share, things to watch out for, just as a nice way to end the webinar?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone that's joined in. I really enjoyed being part of this. You've just touched on smaller organizations, I guess not, and Debbie mentioned budget. So obviously employment law advice could be very expensive, but for small organizations, for HR professionals that are working in small organizations, there's a real power of your network. So I've benefited from, tips and advice from my HR colleagues. I belong to quite a few HR network, WhatsApp groups, etc., and just reaching out to people to ask for advice. How do you do this in Germany? Do you know anything about Works Council in France? You will get some advice. So as much as there's information online and you can Google stuff, always the power of your network and people that you know is always really important as well, very useful.
Debbie?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same. It is about your networking. I mean, the amount of people on this call today, they've probably come with lots of knowledge. They've come from perhaps larger organisations, small organisations. But again, it's really important that you do get, as I mentioned earlier, the information right first time. But also think about, the countries you're going into. Are they the right countries to go into for your business, for your values you have within your organisation as well? And, don't always go too quickly. Think about what you do need to set up, get I call them the brilliant basics in place first of all, and then your organization can start to grow from there. But for me, is it thinking about, the systems you need, the connectivity with your workforce, whether it's just in a region, whether it's globally, think about that, but don't try and do everything too soon. Go in small steps, particularly if you are a small organization with a small budget. But as we've mentioned, there's lots on content on the web. Make sure it's correct, of course. Your network, and then, as we've mentioned earlier, CIPD and other organizations you can go to as well.
Really great advice. Thank you. Cos.
Yeah. So I was just thinking about this. So this is a really good one. So we work with a lot of small or medium, I wouldn't say small, but medium-sized businesses, right? Anything where you have 200 plus employees. And what we found really works for organizations that are just starting out to build their global footprint is building on from what Vilona said. You can leverage your community network. But from a product perspective at Sage People, we also have what we call our customer success community, right? And that is where we give all of our customers access to the same portal so customers can talk to each other, right? And that is a brilliant resource as well. So you can go in and ask other customers who've been on the same journey as you have about how did they approach the Works Council's regulation? What did they build out in the solution? How has it supported them? What are the metrics that they are reporting on? Right. So it is about leveraging that community, but it can also be a product specific community, like in our case. So yeah, I just thought I'd share that.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that's about all the time we have for questions, and there have been some really good questions. So kudos to those asking the questions, and a huge thank you to our speakers for fielding them. Thank you again to Debbie, Cos, Vilona for such a great session today. And thanks to all of you for joining us and getting involved in the Q&A. You will get a copy of the recording sent to you so you can look over the presentation in more detail in your own time. But that is all. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.